For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3654 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3654, a bill to require a report on United States strategy to combat terrorist use of social media and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California, Mr. Royce, and the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include any extraneous material for the record.
So ordered.
And I also ask unanimous consent to place into the record exchanges of letters with the chairman of the Judiciary and Intelligence Committees.
Without objection, so ordered.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of this legislation, H.R. 3654. It's entitled the Combat Terrorist Use of Social Media Act of 2015, and I want to recognize the leadership of Judge Ted Poe, a member of this body on this critical issue. The threat posed by Islamist terrorists have evolved, but the administration's policies have not evolved. If we're going to prevent additional attacks, then the President must lay out a broad, overarching strategy needed to win, and that strategy must include a plan to counter the terrorist use of social media. Terrorists are skillfully exploiting social media to recruit supporters, to radicalize, to raise money, to spread fear. And 2 weeks ago in San Bernardino, California, 14 innocent people were killed and 21 people were injured by radical Islamist terrorists. We know these extremists, husband and wife, used social media, one of them making a pledge on Facebook in support of ISIS. This pledge was identified by Facebook and taken down immediately. Yesterday, it was revealed that the U.S. Department of Homeland Security actually prohibited immigration officials from reviewing the social media postings of all foreign citizens applying for U.S. visas and only intermittently began looking at posts from some visa applicants. So imagine a situation where you have people who are going to Syria, who are posting on social media, and you've got a blanket prohibition on reviewing those social media postings. That was the state of the situation as we're trying to defend the homeland. Frankly, the failure of this administration to incorporate a review of social media posts into the visa approval process is absurd. Ignoring the online statements of terrorists trying to enter the United States puts our country at risk. This must be fixed. And this bill, frankly, is timely, it's important. It forces the administration to put forward a strategy to combat terrorist use of this social media. In 2011, the President promised to create that strategy but never delivered anything. We are simply not going to defeat ISIS or other terrorist groups without combating their social media recruiting. Following a bipartisan letter from Representatives Poe and Mr. Engel and Mr. Sherman and myself last March, Twitter strengthened their policies to assert that statements threatening or promoting terrorism were against Twitter's terms of service, and most of the other social media companies have similar user guidelines that prohibit threats of violence and use of their platforms by terrorists. We need a strategy that clearly articulates our country's goals, the responsibilities of each federal agency, what role each one will play, a vision of how our government is going to work with the private sector, a vision of how we're going to pull civil society into this effort. Without a strategy, the administration's effort to combat terrorist use of social media appear to be disconnected. They appear to be ineffective. And then, of course, after we have that strategy, we are going to need action. It is ironic that extremist groups have turned to Twitter, to Facebook, to YouTube to encourage attacks on a free society, when these companies would not have been created without a free society, one which upholds free speech, free thought, encourages entrepreneurship. So, Mr. Speaker, it is imperative that the administration lay out how we will contend with these terrorists hijacking the social network for their twisted purposes. We truly have basically a caliphate today on the Internet, a virtual caliphate, if you will, on the Internet. This bill by Judge Ted Poe is intended to force a strategy to solve this problem, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California. Actually, New York.
New York, it's a long way from California to New York. But our chairman's from California, so we have this New York-California alliance on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this measure that would push back against the use of social media by terrorist groups, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me start by thanking Congressman Poe for introducing this legislation. I'm very glad to be an original co-sponsor. I also want to thank Congressman Sherman for his hard work, and of course our chairman, Chairman Royce. So this is a real bipartisan, important, strong measure. I think we need to be using every tool at our disposal to meet the challenge posed by ISIS and other terrorist groups. And this bill will help us meet them on the virtual battlefield where they've been having such great success, social media. Now, anyone who's looked at the situation over the past months or years know that the one major difference is social media. Social media, of course, riles up jihadists and also enables them to surreptitiously communicate in terms of plotting terrorist attacks. So we have to be one step ahead of them. We cannot let them be one step ahead of us. And that's why legislation like this is so important. So I cannot think of a conflict in the past in which our enemies have been able to broadcast such horrific depictions of destruction and bloodshed like we're seeing from ISIS. We all know the images of Mohammed Emwazi, who was known as Jihadi John, as he brutally murdered innocent people. Those videos spread across the Internet with staggering speed, showing everyone in the world with the threat that ISIS posed and the tactics ISIS fighters were willing to use. Fortunately, the administration's efforts succeeded in taking him out, but we know there are far too many waiting to take his place. But ISIS isn't just using social media to foment fear and panic. ISIS and other groups have taken full advantage of Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and other platforms to spread their violent ideology, recruit new fighters, and radicalize members of vulnerable and marginalized populations. For example, more and more information comes out about the San Bernardino shooters. It's becoming clear that Tashfeen Maliki used Facebook to convey her commitment to violent extremism to overseas contacts. We need to find a way to deal with this challenge on social media without violating free expression or privacy concerns. It's going to require creative thinking, but I am confident that we can do it. We have to do it. We don't have a choice but to do it. We've already taken some steps. I work with Chairman Royce and Representatives Poe and Sherman to push Twitter to make it easier for users to report recruitment efforts. This is a small step to help with one of the tools ISIS is using, but they are constantly evolving, and we need to keep looking for ways to push back. That's where this legislation comes in. This bill would require the administration to devise a strategy to combat terrorist use of social media and to foster greater collaboration between government and private sector companies to help identify and stop terrorist activities online. Again, we need to look for every advantage possible in taking the fight to ISIS. This bill would help us push back on one of the ways ISIS has achieved such a global reach. I again commend Mr. Poe for his tireless efforts in bringing this legislation to the floor, and the chairman as well, Mr. Sherman. I support this measure. I urge my colleagues to do the same, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
I yield 6 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Judge Poe, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Terrorism, Nonproliferation, and Trade, and the author of this bill.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida for 6 minutes. Texas.
Yeah, don't insult the folks from Texas. I mean, from Florida. I am from Texas. The young lady from Florida might object to that, me being from Texas or being from Florida. I do want to thank Representative Sherman on the other side for co-sponsoring this legislation. Also do want to thank Chairman Royce and Chairman Engel for being co-sponsors, original co-sponsors of this bill. Mr. Speaker, this is another piece of legislation that's come out of the Foreign Affairs Committee, bipartisan, unanimously voted on and approved by the Foreign Affairs Committee, as much of our legislation does. Also, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Speaker, I want to thank three staffers that have worked in the Terrorism Subcommittee, Luke Murray, Orrin Attica, and Jeff Dressler, who now works with the Majority Leader's staff. These three individuals know more about terrorism, I think, than any three people on the Hill, and I want to thank them for their work not only on this bill, but legislation in general. As been said, Mr. Speaker, terrorists use social media, and it's exploded over the last several years. A recent study by the Brookings Institute found that ISIS now uses 40,000 Twitter accounts. 40,000. Terrorists use social media to do the following, Mr. Speaker: to recruit others, to raise money, spread propaganda, and even to train future fighters. And this legislation deals with foreign terrorist organizations. We're not talking about a person who claims to be a terrorist, or we think he is or she is, but specifically foreign terrorist organizations that are designated by our government. That's what this legislation deals with. The recipes for the bombs used in the Boston Marathon, Mr. Speaker, were in al-Qaeda's magazine that was posted on social media before the attack. The al-Qaeda affiliate Al-Shabaab live tweeted the attack on a Kenyan mall that killed 72 people. The al-Qaeda branch in Yemen, known as AQAP, another foreign terrorist organization, held a press conference on Twitter, allowing users to submit questions that were then answered by AQAP and posted back on Twitter the following week, a conference call by terrorists. In October, ISIS issued a new instruction manual on how terrorists can use social media. So today, wannabe terrorists, they don't have to go to the battlefield to Syria to get trained. They can get trained like college credits online, how to be a terrorist and how to be a fighter. Nationwide, the FBI is currently investigating 900 potential lone wolf terrorists in the United States. The internet and social media serve as their playbook to carry out attacks. Since March 2014, 71 people in the United States have been charged with crimes related to ISIS. Their backgrounds are very different, but nearly all of them had spent time online voicing their support for ISIS. Later, they were arrested after their online posts drew some attention by the FBI. In 2011, as the chairman has said, the administration released a report on countering violence extremists that recognized that online radicalization was a growing problem, so the administration promised a strategy how we can deal with this. 4 years later, unfortunately, we don't have a strategy, we don't have a plan. This is a problem because individual agencies are making their own unilateral decisions. This week, we learned that the Department of Homeland Security did not review the social media posts of Tashfeen Malik, who was granted a fiancé visa but posted her radical views on social media prior to obtaining a visa. The State Department does not know how to effectively counter terrorist messaging because it does not have the expertise of the intelligence community. And the intelligence community approaches social media as a capture everything because it has not been made clear what it can do and what it cannot do. And the FBI does not know how far it should be push social media companies to prohibit them from allowing terrorist organizations the content on their sites. So we must have a comprehensive strategy before we can effectively defeat the enemy on the cyber battlefield. Mr. Speaker, all U.S. departments really must be singing the same song on the same page in the hymnal about how to defeat foreign terrorist organizations that use social media, American social media companies. I will say this, that Facebook has done a fairly decent job of bringing down terrorist sites, and Facebook has seen a drop in the number of terrorists that try to use their site. But not all social media companies have been as responsive to terrorism. Mr. Speaker, we already have technology that is used to make sure that child pornography is not posted online. Thanks to Hani Farid, the chairman of the Computer Science Department of Dartmouth College, he invented a technology that is used with Microsoft. And he said that we can use that same protocol that we do to bring down child pornography to bring down social media sites that deal with foreign terrorist organizations and their propaganda and their spreading of murder. Here's what he says. There's no fundamental technology or engineering limitation. This is a business or policy decision, unless the companies have decided that they just can't be bothered. And so that's his opinion on how we can use the same protocol. And this can be done. Use the same protocol and we can bring down those foreign terrorist organization sites. And it's not a free speech issue. That has been discussed, and some are concerned about that, because we're dealing specifically with foreign terrorist organizations, and the Supreme Court has already ruled regarding that issue in 2010 in the Holder versus the Humanitarian Law Project that a foreign terrorist organization does not have constitutional rights in the United States under the First Amendment. So this is not a problem. In this 21st century fight against terrorists who are sophisticated and tech-savvy, we have to defeat these organizations on all the battlefields, overseas, over here, and online. And that's just the way it is. I'll yield back my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm ready to close. I don't know if... yes, so I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Then I will yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Ross Layton, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on the Middle East and North Africa.
Gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the chairman. Thank you to the ranking member who lead this committee in such an able, expert manner in a bipartisan way. And thank you especially to the author of this important resolution, one of our subcommittee chairman, Ted Poe. And I rise in strong support of Judge Poe's bill, the Combat Terrorist Use of Social Media Act, and I urge all of my colleagues to support this important measure. Extremist groups like ISIS are well known for their extensive use of social media, spreading their hateful ideology, inciting violence, and attempting to recruit susceptible individuals to their hateful and twisted cause. When we hear reports and statistics that we have heard today, like ISIS having over 40,000 Twitter accounts, or that there is an estimated 200,000 pro-ISIS social media posts per day, where clearly more needs to be done. These jihadists have become more and more tech-savvy. They're more adept at manipulating the tools of social media, and yet we in the United States lack any comprehensive strategy to counter their perverted ideology via social media. As Judge Poe has very ably argued, the administration could be stopping pro-extremist social media in much the same way that we now stop online child pornography. ISIS and other foreign terrorist organizations do not have free speech rights under American law. Now, we were all shocked, as you heard today, that our very own Homeland Security Department maintained a policy that prevented the screening of visa applicants' social media accounts because we worried about bad public relations, we worried about intrusions into their privacy, even though social media posts, by their very definition, posts are exactly that, reaching out to the public through social manners, meaning through public ways. Every pro-ISIS post or any post by any other foreign terrorist organization that uses Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, everyone that we are able to take down before action is being taken, that's one less chance for these extremists to recruit and spread their vicious propaganda, and the administration needs to start getting serious about stopping it. This bill will require the administration to provide Congress and therefore the American public with a strategy to fight Islamic extremist use of social media, as well as require that the administration give us a policy that enhances the collaboration between the federal government and social media companies so that we can counter this troubling and dangerous threat. I applaud Judge Poe for introducing this bill. I thank our esteemed chairman and ranking member for bringing it to the floor in such a speedy manner. I offer my full support, and I urge all of my colleagues to do the same. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of our time.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from California reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York.
If the chairman doesn't have any other speakers, then I'm prepared to close. Okay.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every day, ISIS is working to bring new fighters into its ranks, recruiting candidates from South Asia, from France, the UK, and right here in the United States. ISIS is able to cast such a wide net because they're taking full advantage of social media. We need to take this tool out of their hands, even as we press forward with our partners to fight ISIS on the battlefield. This legislation will enable us to work more closely with social media companies and put together a strategy to meet this challenge. Again, I want to commend my friend Judge Poe. I urge a yes vote on this bill. And Mr. Poe, you're right, that's just the way it is. I yield back.
Gentleman from New York yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, it was revealed yesterday that the U.S. Department of Homeland Security actually prohibited immigration officials from reviewing the social media postings of all foreign citizens applying for U.S. visas, and only sporadically began looking at posts from some visa applicants. The failure to incorporate a review of social media posts into the visa approval process is absurd. Ignoring the online statements of those terrorists trying to enter the United States puts our country at risk. This must be fixed. Destroying ISIS will require determined leadership. It's going to require presidential leadership, and the President must use his authority as Commander-in-Chief to lead this fight to destroy ISIS, not to contain it, to destroy ISIS and other extremist groups. So it has been said that a virtual caliphate, awash in hate and propaganda, exists online, yet U.S. government efforts in this area are failing. A strategy to combat terrorist use of social media is one of many measures the administration must develop so we can win the fight. Promised in 2011, this strategy is overdue. With this bill, Congress is demanding that the administration deliver its strategy so that the federal agencies can effectively prevent terrorists from using social media to spread hate and fear and violence. I again want to recognize my colleagues, especially from Texas, Representative Poe, Mr. Engel from New York, for their leadership on this measure, which I encourage all our members of this House to support. I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from California yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Bill H.R. 3654 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative.
Mr. Speaker, I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present, and I make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.